What's up, YouTuber fans, steaming fans, cryptocurrency fans? It's your boy Brit VR. Welcome to the show. Today we are here at Northwestern, downtown Chicago, at the Factom Hackathon. So these guys are coming out with smart contracts off-chain on their blockchain, which is totally different from other smart contracts, and we're going to see if we can talk to the CEO, some developers, or people who work for Factom. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the show. Today we are at Northwestern downtown Chicago, and we are at the Factom Hackathon for smart contracts. I have a representative here. Could you tell us your name and what do you do with Factom?
Yeah, my name is Matt York. I just joined Factom a month ago, and I'm helping maintain the open source part of Factom called FactomD.
Okay, could you just give some basic information? What is Factom? Because my subscribers probably have no clue. I don't talk about it too much, but I do know of the cryptocurrency.
Sure. So Factom is a blockchain, but unlike other blockchains, it's more focused around data. So it's a data layer for the blockchain. And so with Factom, you can create your own chain, organize entry datas, and really use it as a base protocol layer to do your own other applications on top of it. And so the reason it's good for using smart contracts, it allows you to write a contract in any language you'd like. Factom doesn't have an execution engine. It doesn't have a VM like Ethereum or other computing blockchains. So the computation is really done outside the chain. And what you're meant to do with Factom is to keep a record of true events, of things that have happened.
So I understand that you guys have Harmony and D-Lock. Why move to the smart contract field or projects for Factom?
We think that Factom is a good use case for smart contracts. And for example, with Ethereum, whenever you interact with the contract on-chain, there's an audit trail that you're meant to follow. And so as an executor, as a party using a smart contract on Ethereum, you're meant to follow this audit trail, and then you interact with the smart contract on-chain whenever you need to. With Factom, there is no on-chain execution, but what we still have is that audit trail. And so it's not like it's a widely different application for Factom. All different use cases for it still involve that sort of pattern. But because there's no on-chain execution, there's less of a risk of somebody hacking your smart contract because the execution happens outside of the chain.
Since you guys are having a smart contract now, is it free for everybody to use, or do you have to go through Factom's protocols first to use it, or can they just, is the code open source that people can just find the code and just make whatever they want?
It is mostly open source. So whenever you interact with the Factom blockchain directly, you spend one of the tokens that it has called an entry credit. So it's a two-token system. So there's factoids, which are a transfer of store of value, and then there's entry credits, which you trade every time you write to the Factom blockchain. So if you wanted to, you could make another API in front of that and let your users interact with it, and you could secure the data on Factom's blockchain. Or if you wanted to make a more open system, you could create a chain on Factom, and then different parties could add entries to your chain, and they could pay to do it directly. So you could either set up to be an intermediary, or you could let people interact. If you wanted to be a more purely distributed application, then people would interact with Factom directly.
And finally, I know there are tons of IT universities in Chicago. Northwestern was a big one because it's mostly finance. Do you know why you guys chose Northwestern to do this?
Not exactly. I've heard that a few people involved in Factom maybe attended here. Other than that, I'm not sure.
All right, so we're going to end the video. Thank you for letting me get this interview. All right, so we're still here at the hackathon, the Factom Hackathon in Chicago. I have Mr. Brands right here. He's a developer. And what team are you with?
We're from the chain estate team, and we basically build a concept to make a more efficient real estate market.
So I heard you've been to multiple hackathons. Yeah, was there any programs that surprised you or say, hey, that was just something very excellent built at this hackathon?
Yeah, so I really was impressed by the hackathon in Shanghai and the expertise that I saw there. I think the people that went there were all professional people, and everybody had like really, really good work ethics. And they built all amazing stuff. There was completely new wallets, completely new concepts that they built from scratch within 40 hours. And that's always amazes me, that people just come together and within a short period of time create something really cool. It's not, in a hackathon you don't create something that's like production ready, right? So you basically create a concept, you show that it kind of works, and then from there you basically gather with your team, you decide if you're going to push it forward or you're just going to do another hackathon.
All right, so we're here at the Factom Hackathon, and they're coming out with smart contracts. Was that very surprising for you to hear this company coming out with smart contracts?
Yeah, so yeah, it was kind of surprising that the off-chain smart contracts, that Factom basically already has this infrastructure ready to do these off-chain smart contracts, right? So I was always interested in off-chain smart contracts. It's a kind of a difficult concept, but the way Factom phrases it is really more easy to understand. And I hope to play around with it more during this hackathon, actually.
All right, thank you. And we're going to continue the show like we always do. So let's get right into it.
You just suck on it, sorry, that's the way it worked. Or you write a backdoor into your code that can effectively provide an exploit to an attacker should it be discovered. That allows you to go through the back door and change the contract when you have to. So putting the smart contract...
By the way, that would be illegal if that was the actual code. That's just fraud.
No,
just saying.
But no, you would have agreed to it by sending it to the smart contract, and the smart contract does have a back door because that's the way it was implemented. And by the way, you should have just looked at the code, figured out it had a back door. So...
If we provided assurance, you wouldn't need that backdoor.
Yeah. So
shameless plug.
So I wanted, before we got past the fact of why smart contracts and code have some advantages, one of the advantages is that it provides you a mechanism for fixing bugs. So.
Well, and just to see, I mean, how incredibly important this is. I mean, I put it in scale. I mean, if I have clients in New York that move like $14–15 trillion a day, okay, through their systems. So if that's happening instantaneously, just think about it. By the end of 1 week, you have just under $100 trillion that's gone out. So just in the time it would take to identify the code and correct it, I mean, you've gone from a $0 problem to a $100 trillion problem. So there's just zero margin for error. And some of these systems, and like I mentioned, not even things financial, the stuff with like the surgical robots again, you have situations where you literally have a zero tolerance for failure, for bugs, for problems, and it has to be 100% edified system. And so all of that stuff up front has to be scrupulously reviewed, monitored, and again, you have to have that ongoing transparency to make sure that it's functioning as intended.
So one of the key elements that I think is going to be important, and I want to make sure that we cover this, when we talk about the concept of identities and people being identified, we're dealing with a lot of different protocols that are out there in the world today, and some of these.
We're so off our script.
The parties that are involved in these contracts, it's very important that they be identified. But the protocols that we have today, I think a lot of times we think, well, if I sell you my car and the Ethereum shows up and we're on the phone and we confirm that the few parts of gas that you sent actually showed up, that we're fine. But really, when we deal with some of these contracts where we're dealing with a lot of the federal agencies, we'll get to this in just a second, but the fact that an identity can be known at the level of assurance and auditability. Paul, I'd like you to kick this part off, and I want to talk about identity, and I think that Factom does it differently, and so the shameless plug here is that because Factom was built in layers, we have the ability to do attestations for identities that are very different. But talk a little bit about how hard it is to get an identity on the blockchain, maybe how some of the other protocols don't really have the ability for auditability to have that assurance, and help educate us a little bit on how identities work in the blockchain world and why they're so important.
Before I talk about the blockchain world, let me clarify about identities in the current world. Okay, A lot of us believe that we all have an identity. If you pull out your driver's license number or card or your passport, you think, see, I have an identity. That's not true. All that document is doing, whether you're talking about a driver's license or a passport, all those documents are doing is attesting that there is a central authority somewhere that has issued you a passport or has issued you a driver's license. The identity is not you. The identity is the system of record that validates you. What you have in your hand is an attestation, not an identity. And so in the real world, there are only as many identities, entities that can provide attestations to other parties. There's only as many identities as there are systems of record, because that's the only thing that matters. In the end, when you go into court and you say, my social security number, it's only yours because there's enough records in enough systems of record that they will say, yeah, those attestations belong to you. So what we're talking about in the blockchain is actually, for the first time, creating identities that are you, that collect attestations, and then based off these attestations, you can now make attestations into contracts. So, for example, I can give my social security number to a law firm or to an auditing firm, and they go, oh, that's a social security number, and you've given me some other attestation, so I guess I'll believe that you're you, right? But if there was a digital identity, and I had worked out my identity with a firm that had really done the deep dive on me and had given me an attestation in my digital identity that this is me, in this system, they wouldn't give that to multiple parties. They'd only give it to one party. And now when I sign an attestation to you that I've given you my social security number, I've effectively put a password on the social security number. It no longer becomes something anybody can use because it goes against the centralized identity. It's now something that's coming against me as an identity. And so what the blockchain actually provides in the context of these smart contracts is the ability for you not to act as a collection of attestations that are very difficult to ascertain whether they're correct or not. It actually creates your ability to be an identity that must, in order to be valid, ascribe an attestation to someone else. Assign that social security number that I'm me, and he can go to my digital identity and ask the parties, yes, did you give the attestation to this identity that that's who he is? And they all say yes, and then we have basically eliminated identity theft. And so this is the power that we have with digital identity. To really put it briefly or small, you can think of the identities we're using today as a mainframe with a few people in front of it. And that mainframe, the records in it, when those records go out, everybody believes it, and that's it. That's the only digital identity there is. The new world with the blockchain, every one of us in the room, a whole crowd of people, a whole crowd of devices, every one of your phones, every one of your applications conceivably has a digital identity that collects attestations and can ascribe attestations into smart contracts, and you actually have an audit trail of literally who agreed to a contract, literally how those terms should be executed, and literally who is looking at those terms and saying, yes, in the real world the car was delivered, in the real world the house title was delivered. And we're not reduced to a constant investigative effort trying to figure out this cloud of attestations we're all running on that are basically free floating in the world, that anybody who happens to find those, a collection of them, like your social security number, your address, a little bit of, can group it all together and pretend to be you. So anyway, this is the power of digital identity, and it's why digital identity is critical to be a component of smart contracts because we have to know who is in, who's agreeing that something happened, and who got paid in the end.